Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is from Chapter 330. Chapter 330. Pierre was shown into the large, brightly lit dining room. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps, and Princess Mary entered with Natasha. Natasha was calm, though a severe and grave expression had again settled on her face. They all three of them now experienced that feeling of awkwardness which usually follows after serious and heartfelt talk. It is impossible to go back to the same conversation. To talk of trifles is awkward, and yet the desire to speak is there, and silence seems like affectation. They went silently to the table. The footman drew back the chairs and pushed them up again. Pierre unfolded his cold table napkin, and, resolving to break the silence, looked at Natasha and at Princess Mary. They had evidently both formed the same resolution. The eyes of both shone with satisfaction and a confession that besides sorrow, life also has joy. "Do you take vodka, Count?" asked Princess Mary, and those words suddenly banished the shadows of the past. "Now tell us about yourself," said she. "One hears such improbable wonders about you." "Yes," replied Pierre, with a smile of mild irony now habitual to him. "They even tell me wonders I myself never dreamed of. Mary Abramovna invited me to her house and kept telling me what had happened, or ought to have happened, to me. Stepan Stepanitch also instructed me to tell of my experiences. In general, I have noticed that it is very easy to an interesting man, I am an interesting man now, people invite me out and tell me all about myself." Natasha smiled and was on the point of speaking. "We have been told," Princess Mary interrupted her, "that you lost 2 billions in Moscow. Is that true?" "But I am 3 times as rich as before," returned Pierre. Though the position was now altered by his decision to pay his wife's debts and to rebuild his houses, Pierre still maintained that he had become 3 times as rich as before. "What I have certainly gained is freedom," he began seriously, but did not continue, noticing that this theme was too egotistic. "And are you building?" "Yes, Savelich says I must." "Tell me, you did not know of the Countess's death when you decided to remain in Moscow?" asked Princess Mary, and immediately blushed, noticing that her question, following his mention of freedom, ascribed to his words a meaning he had perhaps not intended. "No," answered Pierre, evidently not considering awkward the meaning Princess Mary had given to his words. "I heard of it in Orel, and you cannot imagine how it shocked me. We were not an exemplary couple," he added quickly, glancing at Natasha, and noticing on her face curiosity as to how he would speak of his wife. "But her death shocked me terribly. When 2 people quarrel, they are always both in fault, and one's own guilt suddenly becomes terribly serious when the other is no longer alive. And then such a death, without friends and without consolation. I am very, very, very sorry for her," he concluded, and was pleased to notice a look of glad approval on Natasha's face. "Yes, and you are once more an eligible bachelor," said Princess Mary. Pierre suddenly flushed crimson, and for a long time tried not to look at Natasha. When he ventured to glance her way again, her face was cold, stern, and he even fancied, even contemptuous. "And did you really see and speak to Napoleon as we have been told?" said Princess Mary. Pierre laughed. "Not once. Everybody seems to imagine that being taken prisoner means being Napoleon's guest. Not only did I never see him, but I heard nothing about him. I was in much lower company. Supper was over, and Pierre, who at first declined to speak about his captivity, was gradually led on to do so. "But it's true that you remained in Moscow to kill Napoleon?" Natasha asked with a slight smile. "I guessed it then when we met at Shukarov Tower. Do you remember?" Pierre admitted that it was true, and from that was gradually led by Princess Mary's questions, and especially by Natasha's, into giving a detailed account of his adventures. At first he spoke with the amused and mild irony now customary with him toward everybody, and especially towards himself. But when he came to describe the horrors and sufferings he had witnessed, he was unconsciously carried away, and began speaking with the suppressed emotion of a man re-experiencing in recollection strong impressions he has lived through. Princess Mary, with a gentle smile, looked now at Pierre and now at Natasha. In the whole narrative she saw only Pierre and his goodness. Natasha, leaning on her elbow, the expression of her face constantly changing with the narrative, watched Pierre with an attention that never wandered, evidently herself experiencing all that he had described. Not only her look, but her exclamations and the brief questions she put, showed Pierre that she understood just what he wished to convey. It was clear that she understood not only what he said, but also what he wished to, but could not express in words. The account Pierre gave of the incident with the child and the woman for protecting whom he was arrested was this. It was an awful sight. Children abandoned, some in the flames, one was snatched out before my eyes, and there were women who had their things snatched off and their earrings torn out. He flushed and grew confused. Then a patrol arrived, and all the men, all those who were not looting, that is, were arrested, and I among them. "I'm sure you're not telling us everything. I'm sure you did something," said Natasha, and pausing added, "Something fine?" Pierre continued. When he spoke of the execution, he wanted to pass over the horrible details, but Natasha insisted that he should not omit anything. Pierre began to tell about Karateev, but paused. By this time he had risen from the table and was pacing the room, Natasha following him with her eyes. Then he added, "No, you cannot understand what I learned from that illiterate man, that simple fellow." Yes, go on," said Natasha. "Where is he?" "They killed him almost before my eyes." And Pierre, his voice trembling continually, went on to tell of the last days of the retreat, of Karateev's illness and his death. He told of his adventures as he had never yet recalled them. He now, as it were, saw a new meaning in all that he had gone through. Now that he was telling it all to Natasha, he experienced that pleasure which a man has when women listen to him. Not clever women who, when listening, either try to remember what they hear to enrich their minds and when opportunity offers to retell it, or who wish to adopt it to some thought of their own and promptly contribute their own clever comments prepared in their little mental workshop, but the pleasure given by real women gifted with the capacity to select and absorb the very best a man shows of himself. Natasha, without knowing it was all attention, she did not lose a word, no single quiver in Pierre's voice, no look, no twitch of a muscle in his face, nor of a single gesture. She caught the unfinished word in its flight and took it straight into her open heart, divining the secret meaning of all Pierre's mental travail. Princess Mary understood his story and sympathized with him, but she now saw something else that absorbed all her attention. She saw the possibility of love and happiness between Natasha and Pierre, and the first thought of this filled her heart with gladness. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The footmen came in with sad and stern faces to change the candles, but no one noticed them. Pierre finished his story. Natasha continued to look at him intently with bright, attentive, and animate eyes, as if trying to understand something more, which he had perhaps left untold. Pierre, in shamefaced and happy confusion, glanced occasionally at her, and tried to think what to say next to introduce a fresh subject. Princess Mary was silent. It occurred to none of them that it was 3 o'clock and time to go to bed. "People speak of misfortunes and sufferings," remarked Pierre. "But if at this moment I were asked, would you rather be what you were before you were taken prisoner, or go through all this again, then for heaven's sake let me again have captivity and horseflesh. We imagine that when we are thrown out of our usual ruts, all is lost. But it is only then that what is new and good begins. While there is life, there is happiness. There is much, much before us. I say this to you, he added, turning to Natasha. Yes, yes, she said, answering something quite different. I too wish nothing but to relive it all from the beginning. Pierre looked intently at her. Yes, and nothing more, said Natasha. It's not true, not true, cried Pierre. I'm not to blame for being alive and wishing to live, nor you either. Suddenly Natasha bent her head, covered her face with her hands, and began to cry. What is it, Natasha? Said Princess Mary. Nothing, nothing. She smiled at Pierre through her tears. Good night. It's time for bed. Pierre rose and took his leave. Princess Mary and Natasha met as usual in the bedroom. They talked of what Pierre had told them. Princess Mary did not express her opinion of Pierre, nor did Natasha speak of him. Well, good night, Mary, said Natasha. Do you know, I am often afraid that by not speaking of him, she meant Prince Andrew, for fear of not doing justice to our feelings, we forget him. Princess Mary sighed deeply, and thereby acknowledged the justice of Natasha's remark, but she did not express agreement in words. Is it possible to forget? Said she. It did me so much good to tell all about it today. It was hard and painful, but good, very good, said Natasha. I am sure he really loved him. That is why I told him. Was that all right? She added, suddenly blushing. To tell Pierre? Oh, yes. What a splendid man he is, said Princess Mary. Do you know, Mary, Natasha suddenly said with a mischievous smile, such as Princess Mary had not seen on her face for a very long time. He has somehow grown so clean, smooth, and fresh, as if he had just come out of a Russian bath. Do you understand? Out of a moral bath. Isn't it true? Yes, replied Princess Mary. He is greatly improved. With a short coat and his hair cropped, just as if he had come straight from the bath. Papa used to... I understand why he, Prince Andrew, liked no one so much as him, said Princess Mary. Yes, and yet he is quite different. They say men are friends when they are really quite different. That must be true. Really, he is quite unlike him in everything. Yes, but he's wonderful. Well, good night, said Natasha. And the same mischievous smile lingered for a long time on her face, as if it had been forgotten there. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 330. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 330. How to Get Rich. In his book Liberalism, Ludwig von Mises writes that, quote, more dangerous than bayonets and cannon are the weapons of the mind, end quote. The armaments of the mind are indeed powerful. Their potency is such that entire nations are stirred by their deployments, and, a la a Tolstoyan deduction, so too do they disturb individuals, the prime movers of nations. We need look no further than to our hero Pierre Bezukhov to witness the awesome authority the mind exercises over the individual. Recall Pierre's journey so far. When we first met with him, he was a confused, absent-minded fool. He was gullible and credulous. Specious, short-lived intellectual fancies dragged him about like a sack of dirty laundry. All the while, a silly self-seriousness propelled him into asinine adventures, such as his attempted assassination of Napoleon Bonaparte. Look at him now, though. Today he speaks with an amused and mild irony towards others and towards himself. He's able to show great empathy even towards people like Helene, who have gravely wronged him. He speaks with earthly philosophical insight, like when he observes that, when two people quarrel, both are always at fault. His peace of mind and goodwill towards others is apparent to everybody. Princess Mary can't help but note his essential goodness. Pierre is aware of it too, and he knows where it comes from. He believes that the genesis of his newfound wisdom and mental strength, like fire to metalwork, is born of the adversity and suffering he endured during captivity. He tells Mary and Natasha that he would gladly submit again to the French if he could only glimpse the lessons in suffering as taught by Platon Karatev. It's quite the statement. Mary, as if testing his claims of happiness, asks if it's true that he lost millions during the French occupation. Pierre's response is instructive. He says, "Yes, but I am 3 times as rich as before." Daily meditation. Gems, gold, silver, and vast polished round tables are but earthly dross, which cannot be loved by a pure mind that is mindful of whence it came, is unblemished by sin, and which, when released from the body, still straightway soar aloft to the highest heaven. Seneca, Of Consolation to Helvia. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 330 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the description, alongside my links to my Amazon wish list for books and movies. If you decide to support me by getting a book or a movie, we'll talk about that book or a movie over Zoom or something. We can set that up. All right. Thanks again for listening. Remember that tomorrow we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 331 of War and Peace. I hope you can make it. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.